All right, today we're diving into a text that is, well, pretty dense and definitely challenging. It's called Lehre der Schöpfungsenergie, or the teaching of creation energy. And it's a whole philosophy of life that kicks off with a claim so bold, it kind of makes you wonder if you could even understand it at all.
See what I mean? Right from the jump, the text says it's basically untranslatable. It argues that to really get what it's saying, a simple translation just won't cut it. And this isn't just some throwaway warning, you know? It's actually a core part of the whole teaching. So what's behind a claim like that?
That's the big question, isn't it? What kind of ideas are supposedly so deep, so profound, that they can only be truly expressed in one specific language? Let's dig in and find out.
So first, let's just tackle that big claim about language head-on. According to this text, German isn't just another language. Nope. It's a vessel for a very specific kind of coded information.
Okay, so here's how the text builds its case. It claims that German comes from this ancient language called Old Loranian, and because of that, it has this special code inside it that you just can't transfer to other languages. And what about other languages, like English? Well, the text pretty much dismisses it as a semi-acceptable world auxiliary language, basically a helper language. So the bottom line, according to the doctrine, is stark. If you want the real deal, you have to learn German and read the original texts yourself.
Now let's get to the central pillar of this whole thing, because it really reframes the entire universe. It pushes past traditional ideas of God and moves toward what it presents as a more fundamental reality, a universal force.
So where does it all start? According to this teaching, everything begins with the nihilo, the absolute nothing. And it's described as more than just emptiness. It's a state of total, absolute non-existence. And it's from this complete void that some kind of impulse is said to have created the very first being, which then sets the stage for, well, everything else.
And that impulse brings us to the main event, Schöpfungsenergie, or creation energy. This is the dynamic, life-giving force that the text claims was born from the nihilo. Now, this isn't a person or a god. It's the fundamental energy that animates all of existence. It's the beginning and the end, the A and the O of everything.
And here is where you really see the major split from most mainstream religions. On the left, you've got creation energy. It's presented as this neutral, impersonal force that just is. It's the real engine of everything. But on the right, you have the text's critique of the idea of God, calling it an imagined, personal being, an illusion, born from, and this is their term, non-thinking, that just leads to people being subservient. So the big shift is from a personal God to this impersonal, universal energy.
This whole critique of God leads us right into the doctrine's next major theme, a really deep skepticism of belief itself. And the text uses a very, very strong German word for this, Dummheit, which translates directly to stupidity.
But, and this is super important, we have to be really clear about what the text means by that word. Dummheit here isn't an insult about how smart someone is. It's not about IQ. It specifically means the act of self-non-thinking, that state of just accepting ideas through belief, instead of using your own logic and reason to figure out reality for yourself.
So let's break this down. The text sets up this huge conflict between two ways of being. On one side, you have self-thinking, which is presented as the only way to recognize reality and live a real effective life. On the other side is believing, which the text argues actually leads you away from reality, because it's all based on ideas you can't prove. It claims this ultimately makes you a slave of their faith.
And to really hammer home what it sees as the dangers of these belief-based systems, the text drops this absolutely staggering figure. It claims that, and it specifically cites something called Pleiadian information for this, that religious conflicts have caused 3.7 billion deaths over the last 4,000 years. It's a shocking number, and it's meant to show the real-world cost of what the doctrine calls non-thinking.
So, what does all this mean for things like the soul or the afterlife? Well, the doctrine applies this same logic to those big concepts. And as you might guess, it offers its own pretty unique take that really challenges conventional ideas.
Now, this is a really key distinction the text makes. It says to forget the word Geist or spirit. It calls that a falsified, misunderstood term that's all tangled up with wrong ideas about God and souls. It insists we should replace it with Bewusstsein or consciousness. This, it says, is the real, actual seat of our thoughts, our feelings, our personality, and it's something that we, as individuals, can actually control and shape.
And this new definition of consciousness completely changes how the doctrine sees rebirth. Let's just walk through the process it describes. 1. A person's physical body dies. 2. And this is the big one. Their unique personality and consciousness, everything that made them them, well, it just stops existing. Forever. 3. That little fragment of creation energy that was powering them goes back into the big universal pool. And finally, 4. After some time, that same bit of energy goes on to animate a totally new person with a completely different personality.
And I just have to say that again because it's probably the most radical idea in this whole teaching. Your personality, your memories, your you-ness, it doesn't come back. The text is crystal clear on this. Only the impersonal universal energy gets recycled. The individual that you are right now is a one-time only event.
So, okay, we've got an impersonal universe, we're told our personality is temporary, and belief is out. What on earth are you supposed to do with all that? Well, this final section is all about that, the proposed path forward for a human being.
You know, it really all boils down to radical self-responsibility. It's a call to stop looking outside yourself for answers, reject belief systems, and rely on your own logic and reason. It's about taking total ownership of your thoughts, creating order in your own mind, and understanding that you, and only you, are the architect of your own happiness or your own suffering.
And this quote just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? It draws this incredibly hard line in the sand. A fact is something you can prove, something real. An opinion or a belief, well, according to the text, that's something else entirely. It's an assumption that just doesn't have the proof to back it up.
Which leaves us with the text's final, really powerful challenge. It throws this idea out there: what if what we believe isn't a conviction at all? What if it's simply the stuff we haven't gotten around to really truly thinking about for ourselves yet? It's a heavy thought, and a pretty provocative one to end on.
All right, today we're diving into a pretty unique and complex worldview. It comes from a German text called the Lehre der Schöpfungsenergie, which translates to the doctrine of creation energy. It lays out a whole cosmology, a really sharp critique of how we think, and this epic story about our purpose that spans millions of years. So, let's get into it. So right out of the gate, the text hits you with this pretty extraordinary claim. It argues that its teachings aren't just written in German, but they're actually encoded inside the language itself, which it says comes from something called Old Lyran. The source is adamant that any translation, like the one we're using right now, can only ever give you a faint echo of the true meaning. This sets the whole thing up not as a philosophy, but more like a piece of precise coded information.
So we have to start with that foundational claim, right? Before we can even get into what the doctrine says, we have to understand how it says it's being delivered. Through a language it presents as way more than just words, but as a special vehicle for an untranslatable code. Okay, now that we've touched on the delivery system, this idea of a coded language, we can get to the message itself. We're now moving to the absolute core of the doctrine, this cosmic force it calls creation energy, which it says is the foundation for everything that exists. The text calls this force Schöpfungsenergie, creation energy, and it describes it as the fundamental engine of the universe. According to this doctrine, without this energy, nothing could come to be, nothing could exist, and nothing could pass away. It's the beginning and the end of everything, and get this, it all emerged from an absolute void, a state of total non-existence that the text calls the nihilo, or the nothing.
The entire cosmology here really hinges on this duality. On one side, you have nisht, the nothing. Now, this isn't just empty space. It's an unimaginable state of absolute null, a place where not even dimensions can exist. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around. On the other side is sein, being, or existence itself. The doctrine says that a single creative impulse from inside that eternal nothing caused creation energy to just burst out, generating the entire reality that we live in. Okay, so from that huge cosmic scale, the doctrine then zooms way, way in, shifting from the universe to the individual. And it identifies what it sees as the #1 obstacle to human development. And it's not some external force. It's something inside our own minds, belief.
And here it is. This is the central conflict. The text draws a very hard line between wahres Wissen, or true knowledge, and Glauben, or belief. True knowledge is something you figure out for yourself, through your own research and your own logic. Belief, on the other hand, is just tossed aside as an unproven assumption. It's someone's interpretation of reality, not reality itself. The text is super clear here, saying that belief is basically the same thing as not thinking. And according to the text, this not thinking, which, I bluntly calls dimheit, or stupidity, is the source of a whole bunch of humanity's problems. It specifically calls out things like religions, sects, conspiracy theories, and dogmatism as the direct result of choosing belief over your own logical thought.
Now, this is the text's specific viewpoint on what holds people back. And to really underscore how serious it thinks this is, the source makes a staggering claim that over just the last 4,000 years, religious wars and persecution, which it blames on this not thinking, have cost a total of 3.7 billion human lives. And the text really doesn't pull any punches when it talks about the consequences. As this quote shows, it sees giving up your own critical thought for belief as a kind of conscious decay, a failure that just leaves you wide open to being deceived.
So if belief is the enemy and thinking is the goal, then what's the whole point of a human life? Well, this is where the doctrine zooms way back out again, to this epic, almost unbelievable timescale, presenting our entire existence as just one tiny step on an incredible 40 million year journey.
So the text talks about reincarnation, but you kind of have to throw out everything you think you know about that word. This is a totally different beast. According to this doctrine, your personality, your memories, the you that is you, all of that just stops existing when you die. What carries on is the immortal little piece of creation energy that was animating you. This creation energy form is what moves on, not to be reborn as you, but to go into a totally new body and continue its own separate impersonal evolution.
Yeah, the process it lays out is almost mechanical. As you can see, when a person dies, their individual identity is just poof, gone. The energy form that was inside them goes to an other side realm to evolve. Then, with what it claims is great precision on the 21st day after a new conception, that energy enters the fetus and a brand new, totally unique personality starts to form, with zero memory of any previous life.
So what's the end game here? Why go through all this?
Well, the text describes this absolutely massive evolutionary journey. A single creation energy form will live inside countless different human bodies over a period of 40 to 60 million years. Each lifetime is just another chance to accumulate knowledge and evolve. And the final goal of this huge cycle? For that energy form to become so developed, so powerful, that it can finally just merge back into the universal creation, becoming one with the whole cosmos.
So there you have it, the doctrine of creation energy. It's a reality built on a coded language, a cosmic battle between knowledge and belief, and it all plays out over this staggering 40 million year cycle of reincarnation. And it ultimately leaves us with a pretty fundamental question, one that sits right at the heart of its teachings. If belief really is the enemy of truth, what does it actually mean to know something? And in a world filled with competing ideas, who gets to define what's real?